Folks, look, what is the lesson here? There is a really good lesson in among all of this. Let me tell you what it is. When we're dealing with suicide, it's a delicate subject, and there are many people throughout the world who have been affected, family members and friends that have been affected by suicide. Here's the lesson, folks. What we need to understand in this life is that people have their own unique personalities. They have their own unique personalities and they have their own unique circumstances in life. These personalities and unique circumstances give rise to what we are going to call a worldview. Everybody has a worldview. Some people think this, and this is right. Other people think this, and this is right. The people over here think these people are wrong, and vice versa. Everybody has a worldview. There may be some overlap between these two parties, but then there's going to be some divergence. Everyone has a worldview. And the worldview basically emerges from a combination of that person's innate genetic personality and their own unique circumstances in life. What do I mean by their own unique circumstances? Well, everyone has circumstances whereby they have access to certain information. How do you become informed about something, folks? You need information. So everybody has a unique set of circumstances. They sit within a unique informational landscape. Certain people are looking up certain things online and on social media. Certain people are talking with certain other people in their orbit. And this information that comes from the online space and the real world forms their own unique circumstances with their own unique flow of information going into their own brain. When you couple these two things, personality at birth and the unique informational inputs that come from people's circumstances and from their environment in which they are living, this is going to give rise to a worldview. Now, nobody has the perfect worldview because all personalities and all information carries some distortion. What is distortion? Distortion is nothing other than inaccuracies about the facts of reality. Put differently, misunderstandings about the facts of reality. No one person on planet Earth has the perfect worldview. Every worldview has a mixture of personality distortion and informational distortion. All personalities carry certain distortion. All information carries certain distortion. So you may have a 90% clean worldview, but there will always be 10% distortion. Now, some people have more distortion in their worldview than others. Some people have more inaccuracies in their worldview than others. So while you or I might see the world 90% clearly, but there's still a haze of 10% distortion, there are other people who see the world 30% clearly, and there's this big, murky, muddy 70% of distortion that's making it hard for them to see the facts of reality. Folks, the lesson here is suicidal people, by their very nature, have an enormous amount of distortion in their worldview. By definition, folks, every creature on the planet, every living thing wants to live. Its goal, the goal of any living creature or organism, is to live, survive, and reproduce. That's the goal. And if you can do that for as long as possible, all the better. The longer you can live, the more you can reproduce. That's good. All living things want to live. They don't want to die if they can avoid it. Now, death is inevitable. It's an inevitable part of life. But all living things, they want to live for as long as they can. so that they can at least achieve their biological goal, which is to reproduce. Nobody wants to die before their time. No creature, no organism wants to die before its time. Every living thing wants to maximize its genetic success, pass on its genes, pass on its DNA to the next generation so that the cycle continues. Folks, a suicidal person has come to the conclusion that they want to kill themselves. This is anti-life. For someone to come to that conclusion, they must have such a distorted worldview, a distorted version of reality in order to come to that conclusion. Now, I know what you might say. You might say, well, hold on. If someone's in tremendous pain, and it looks like they're going to die, it looks like they are dying, well, I mean, might they not want to put themselves out of misery? What I would say to you is, go over to YouTube, go onto the playlists on Bandido Talks, go onto the playlist Bandido's Beef, and listen and watch my episode on my beef with assisted dying. That will fully inform you about what I think about, oh, such and such is in pain and they want to kill themselves. I'm not going to get into this now. We're at 1 hour and 33 minutes. Fuck knows how long this show would go on for if I open that can of worms. So look, you might say, oh, but people who are in pain, that's not distortion. Pain is real. Nothing distorted about it. Okay, well, if you want to know what I think about that, over to YouTube, my beef with assisted dying on the Bandido's Beef playlist. It's about 1 hour long, the episode. Listen to that, and you'll get my full perspective on that particular question regarding pain. The point is, folks, people who want to kill themselves, I would argue, it's just my opinion, any person who has arrived at the conclusion that they want to kill themselves is operating under some significant distortion. Like, we're talking 20% clarity, 80% distortion. Like, it's very muddy. They are not seeing the world clearly. They have a worldview that is very cloudy. And the lesson here is, folks, when you're looking at suicidal people, it is tempting to think, just like people who perhaps suffer with addiction, it's tempting to think, well, what magic thing can I say? What magic thing can I say? There are a lot of uncontrollables swirling around here. And people who have been close to loved ones, whether it's family or friends, family and friends who have passed through a suicide will oftentimes beat the shit out of themselves. They will beat themselves up and say, how did I let this happen? How did I let my best friend kill themselves? How did I allow these circumstances to emerge? And you will get family members and friends who will live out the rest of their lives feeling guilty about not having prevented the suicide. The lesson here is, folks, Jesus Christ, cut yourself a bit of slack. Cut yourself a bit of slack. If you are one of these people who has had experience of a dear friend or loved one who has committed suicide, and you've been beating yourself up about this, goodness gracious me, please rewatch this show, particularly the last 30 or 40 minutes. Because hopefully what you now realize is that there are so many uncontrollables, things that you have no control over, that are impacting this person and creating all of this distortion in this person, this suicidal person's worldview. And there is nothing you can do about it. But you, ironically enough, you could be operating under the distorted notion that you could have done something when in reality you could have done nothing. Believe me, if you really cared for this person, if you really did care for them and you gave them as much as you could give them in this life, you can do no more. You're just going to have to say, you know what? I did my best. Now, if you have regret, if you feel as if, you didn't fully invest in that person and, you could have spent more time with them and you have regrets about the nature of your relationship, well, that's a different discussion. But if you're one of these people who did the very best you could for this person, but they still went ahead and committed suicide and killed themselves, give yourself a break and realize that, folks, we talk about this on the show all the time. We can really split the world up into two very simple categories, controllables and uncontrollables. When we're talking about suicide, there are so many uncontrollables fucking flying around in this equation. Uncontrollables that from your perspective you can't influence. You can't get into the DNA of the loved one who has committed suicide. You can't get into their DNA and rewire their personality and make them a more optimistic, more emotionally stable, less excessively conscientious person that's going to make them more prone to optimistic worldviews. You can't get into their DNA and change their personality. That would be like you saying, I can change their eye color. You can't. Or I want to change their height. You can't. If someone's born 5'7" like me, I'm 5'7". Oh well, that's just the way it is. I can't do anything about it. I was born with green eyes. I can't do anything about it. It's the same thing with people's personalities. You can't get in there into the DNA and rewire this person's personality. You could not have done that. It's an uncontrollable. They were born that way. They were born with just enough instability in their personality, with just enough abnormal conscientiousness, with just enough pessimism and depressive tendencies, so that when all of these things came together, they ended up committing suicide. Also, not only can you not influence their personality, you can't influence their decisions either. If these people want to take alcohol and take drugs and smoke wacky substances and take magic mushrooms and take fucking psychiatric medication because they have mental health problems, you can't grab them by the scruff of the neck, tie them to a bed and force them to live out the rest of their existence tied to the bed while you bring them food and water. You can't do that. You're going to get arrested and probably put in prison for imprisoning someone against their will. So you can't control, ultimately, other people's decisions. What they are going to do is what they are going to do. If they are going to take alcohol, that's not on you. You can explain if you want why it's not a good idea, but they ultimately have the final say. And if they're going to take alcohol, you can't physically stop them. If they're going to take drugs, you can't do anything about it. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, it's the same thing again. You can't protect them from the negativity that comes from social media and the broader mainstream media landscape. Everybody has phones these days. Everybody has access to the internet. Again, you can't take their phone off them and lock them in a room whereby they never have access to Wi-Fi or the internet. Again, you can't do that. These people are going to, like most people, wander onto the internet, wander onto social media. And because of the previous two things, their inherent depressive personality traits and perhaps their consumption of mind-altering substances, throw in the negativity from social media, and all of this distortion starts to build. These are all uncontrollables. You can't manipulate someone's personality. You can't stop them from taking alcohol or drugs. You can't stop them from consuming social media or news. You have to know where to draw the line. There's a great quote. Life really comes down to two things. What a man can do and what a man can't do. And we've talked about this on the show before. You need to know what you can do and can't do in this life. And what you can't do is fucking tie someone to a bed and force them to live the existence that you want them to live. You can't do that. No matter how much you love them and care about them, you can't do that. You can't force someone against their will into handcuffs, strap them to the bed, lock the door, keep them in their room for the rest of their life, away from Wi-Fi, away from the internet, away from alcohol, away from drugs. You can't do that. There comes a point where you have to accept that these other people are their own unique individuals. This is what I was saying when we were reading the article. Ashton, 19 years of age. He's a fully grown adult. Thomas, 22 years of age. Fully grown adult. Inexperienced? Perhaps. But they're fully grown adults. And you know, whether it's Ashton's mother or Thomas's father, look, I think their choice of words, for the sake of the show, I'm diving into the words. And there's a contradiction between the words and the actions. Okay, that's just me analysing the story through a cold, critical, clinical lens. These parents shouldn't be beating themselves up. They really shouldn't. Nor should any friend or any other person associated with the person who's now deceased, having killed themselves via suicide. Suicide is exceptionally complex. There are so many uncontrollables that are out of our sphere of influence. And the big lesson to take away from this show is, if you, having listened to this show, if you are feeling guilty, if you are feeling like you could have done more, I would probably bet that there was nothing more that you could have done. Yes, there will be rare cases where people maybe feel super regretful because they did something that contributed in some significant way to the suicide. I don't know. Most people probably did their best by the suicidal person. There was probably nothing else that was going to stop that person from taking their own life. That's just the long and short of it. And once you understand, folks, when we go down through this show and we break down Kenneth Law, we break down the Canadian government, we break down assisted dying, we break down this notion, is Kenneth Law evil, or is there a market demand for suicide? Once you then realise that people like Kenneth Law are unusual people, once you understand that people who want to commit suicide in their own way are unusual people, Kenneth Law and the suicidal people are both operating under significant forms of distortion in their worldviews. And that's what's leading them to these strange behaviours. Kenneth Law is selling people substances that he knows is going to kill them. Most other people, as I've already said, have too much conscientiousness, have too much of a conscience, have too much of a guilt mechanism to even allow them to consider doing something like that. Likewise with the suicidal people. Most people don't actually seriously consider killing themselves. The idea might fleetingly come into their mind, but as soon as it's in, it's out. Most people don't really want to kill themselves. And once you break all this down, you then realise, holy fuck, there is so much distortion in play here. And there are so many sources of distortion for the suicidal people that they actually suicidal people fall into the category of an uncontrollable. And I don't know if that brings any comfort or solace to any person who may be watching this that is lamenting the loss of a loved one. But, you know, there's this thing called an open loop. An open loop meaning, you know, you have some sense of regret about something that's happened in your life and you can't close the loop because you're blaming yourself for something that has happened. Hopefully, you will realise if you've made it 1 hour and fucking 47 minutes into this show, hopefully now you will realize there is a market for suicidal people. For all the reasons that I've explained, there will be people like Kenneth Law and the governments of the world who will try to exploit these suicidal people. Because make no mistake, folks, it's not just Kenneth Law. It's the governments too. They're assisted dying. Assisted dying, it's the same thing. It's just legal in the opinion of the government. So the government knows, Kenneth Law knows, that there's a demand in the market for this sort of stuff. We have now tried to explore on this show why there's a demand, why there are so many suicidal people, and more importantly for you watching and listening, why you ought to not be beating yourself up about the loss of a loved one who has committed suicide. Because once you fundamentally grasp how complex the mind, or better still, how complex the worldview is of a suicidal person, once you comprehend this notion of distortion and how distortion can build in a worldview and how it can lead to very strange conclusions about the right course of action, you then should hopefully feel that open loop closing a little. Because it's oh so tempting. It is oh so tempting to blame yourself. It's so tempting to say, I could have done more. I should have been able to stop my friend from killing themselves. I should have been able to stop my daughter, my son, my brother from killing themselves. I should have found a way. It's on me. I'm the responsible party. Now look, I like the fact that people take responsibility. I think it's a good thing because it makes you engage in a critical analysis. I think that's a good thing that people do take on the responsibility for at least engaging in an analysis as to how this happened. But to forever beat yourself up about the death of this loved one, that is distortion in your own mind. That's what this show's all about, folks. It's trying to reveal to you your own distortion around this topic. For all of you who are lamenting the loss of a loved one from suicide, this show, what I'm trying to tell you is, you beating yourself up is in itself a form of distortion. It's you not understanding how complex the suicide process is and how many uncontrollables are in the equation here for the suicidal person. Uncontrollables that you have no agency over. Folks, all we can do in this life is give our best. That is a controllable. That is a controllable. And no matter who it is that you're dealing with in life, folks, you know a good rule of thumb? You give them your best. If they are someone that you admire, respect, and care about, give them your best. Because you know what? None of us know what is going on in the minds of other people. You could be meeting someone who seems like they're putting on a good show, but maybe deep down, they are really struggling. And nothing you can perhaps say or do is going to change their course of action. So the best that you can do is, for the time that that person is living, give them your best. And you know what? If they decide, through their own cloudy distortion, if they decide to go ahead and commit suicide, well, at least you can stare yourself in the mirror and say, you know what? I'm sad that this person is gone. I'm sad that they arrived at this conclusion. But you know what? I gave them my best when they were living. I did all I could to enrich their existence, to make it worth living. But you need to know where to draw the line, folks, when it comes to beating yourself up. There's one thing taking responsibility. There's one thing being responsible and engaging in a critical analysis. I'm all for that. If you've had a loved one who has committed suicide, I do think that you should analyse why this happened and how it happened. Absolutely. I think you will learn something very important. You don't want to lose lessons in life, folks, when you do lose someone important. So I think the critical analysis is a good thing. I think it's good to take on the responsibility of engaging in that analysis. But it's like the famous quote from a pirate lord in the Caribbean. That famous quote that I just said to you. I think it's famous. In this life, it really comes down to two things. What a man can do and what a man can't do. You need to know what you can and can't do. You need to know where to draw the line. Because the last thing you would want to do is misuse your precious time, energy, and attention, lamenting the loss of a loved one who has committed suicide when you were not responsible for what it is that they did. They decided to do it. They had their own cloudy distortion, their own distorted worldview. They decided to do it. They took responsibility for ending their own life. That's not on you. It's very important to realize that. That might close an open loop for some of you out there. Because the last thing we want to do is to be living this life with an open loop. Because when you have an open loop, it makes it very hard for you to proceed forward in life. Because you're constantly drawn back to the past. You're being drawn out of the present and into the past. And your brain is working overtime, trying to figure out how you could have saved this suicidal person's life, when in reality, there was nothing more you could have done. And once that penny drops, boom, the loop closes. And now, instead of being pulled out of the present and into the past, you can now live in the present and move forward into the future. And ensure that your time, energy, and attention for however long you are living in this life, that will ensure that you are directing those precious resources in the right way. Open loops can cause a misdirection of time and energy and attention. We don't want to misuse those resources, folks. We don't want to effectively waste our existence fucking going back and forth on a problem that ultimately had nothing to do with us. We had no responsibility for this person committing suicide. It was on them. They decided to do it. That was the conclusion they came to. For all the reasons that we've explained already. So it's very important, folks. Always bear that in mind. And don't be so hard on yourself when it comes to this topic of suicide. When you consider just how many uncontrollables are swirling around in this equation.